Tuck them into the ground, water them for a couple of weeks, and hope the space somehow starts looking full, finished, and expensive on its own. But by July, the weeds are back. The mulch is showing half the bed still looks bare, and the whole yard feels like it never quite came together. Now here's the good news. You do not need more annuals. You do not need to rework your whole landscape, and you definitely do not need to spend every weekend babysitting plants just to get decent color. What you actually need are the right perennials planted at the right time. Because when you plant fast-spreading perennials in April, you are giving them the exact window they need to settle and push roots and start building the kind of growth that makes a yard look dramatically fuller by summer. And once established, most of these plants start doing the heavy lifting for you. They fill space. They soften hard edges. They crowd out weeds. They bring in bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. And they come back next year, even stronger, without constant upkeep. That is how you get a yard that looks intentional instead of unfinished. So in today's video, I'm walking you through 15 fast-spreading perennials that are absolutely worth planting in April if you want a lush landscape with less effort. Some of these are perfect for hot, dry spots where other plants give up. Some are ideal for front yard curb appeal where you want clean, colorful impact. And a few of them are so reliable that once they get going, you really do not have to babysit them much at all. And stay with me because the top 3 on this list are especially good if you want that who designed your yard look without paying for a landscape crew. Let's start with one that a lot of people overlook, even though it may be one of the easiest ways to make a spring garden look polished fast. Number 15. Creeping phlox. If you want one of the easiest ways to turn a plain slope, border edge, or sunny front bed into something that looks professionally planted, creeping phlox deserves a spot on your list. This is the kind of plant that homeowners love because it does 2 jobs at the same time. It spreads outward to cover ground, and when it blooms, it creates that dense sheet of color that makes the whole area look planned instead of patchy. In spring, it can form a carpet of pink, purple, white, or blue flowers so thick you can barely see the foliage underneath. Most people think of creeping phlox as just a spring flower, but what they do not realize is that its real value is in the structure it gives you after bloom, too. Even when the flowers are gone, it still works as a neat, low-growing mat that helps suppress weeds and soften the edges of paths, walls, and beds. For practical details, creeping phlox does best in full sun and well-drained soil. It is a strong fit for zones 3 through 9, which means it works in a big part of the United States. If you live in the Midwest, the Mid-Atlantic, or parts of the Northeast, it handles cold winters beautifully. If you are in warmer areas, just make sure it is not sitting in soggy ground. That is where people get into trouble. Visually, this is one of those plants that makes a yard look instantly more finished. Along a mailbox bed on a low retaining wall or spilling slightly over the edge of a sunny walkway, it gives you that thick layered look people usually associate with more expensive landscapes. I know one homeowner in Pennsylvania who had a sloped front bed that always looked thin and weedy by early summer. She added creeping phlox along the edge in April, and by the next spring, that entire area had become the part of the yard neighbors mentioned first. Now, if your problem is not a sunny slope, but a bare patch where you want color and weed control closer to the ground, the next plant is even more aggressive in the best possible way. Number 14. Ajuga. Ajuga is one of those plants that can quietly solve a frustrating problem for homeowners. You need something low, colorful, and fast, but you do not want to keep replanting every year. Ajuga spreads by runners, which means once it gets settled in, it starts moving outward on its own and filling gaps without constant effort from you. That alone makes it valuable. But what makes people really fall in love with it is the foliage. Depending on the variety, you can get deep bronze, dark green, glossy purple, or even variegated leaves, and then in spring you get those upright blue-purple flower spikes rising above the mat. Most people do not realize ajuga can be far more useful for foliage contrast than for bloom alone. In other words, it is not just a flowering plant, it is a design plant. It helps break up boring green spaces and gives the bed a richer, layered look, even when nothing else is blooming hard. For best results, ajuga works in part sun to part shade, though in cooler regions it can handle more sun. It grows well in zones 3 through 10, and that makes it especially flexible for suburban yards from the Midwest to the South. Keep the soil reasonably moist while it is establishing. After that, it is surprisingly easygoing as long as you do not let it sit in standing water. In a yard, ajuga gives you that thick, low-finished look under shrubs near stepping stones or along the front edge of a mixed bed. It is especially good in those spots where mulch keeps washing out or weeds keep sneaking in. A homeowner in North Carolina used ajuga beneath a row of shrubs by the driveway where nothing had looked right before. Within a season, the area stopped looking like an afterthought and started looking like a designed planting strip. Now, if you like the idea of something that spreads well but still looks soft, graceful, and more flower-forward, the next one may be a better fit. Number 13. Hardy geranium. Hardy geranium is one of the most underrated landscape plants for homeowners who want a yard that looks full without feeling fussy. This is not the annual geranium you see in porch pots. This is the perennial type, and it earns its place because it mounds, spills, and slowly spreads in a way that feels relaxed and natural. It gives you that soft cottage garden effect, but it still works beautifully in more structured suburban beds. Why do homeowners love it? Because it covers space blooms generously and asks for very little once established. Some varieties, especially ones like Roseanne, bloom for a surprisingly long stretch, which makes them incredibly valuable if you are trying to keep color moving through the yard without rotating plants every few weeks. What most people do not realize is that hardy geranium often performs better than expected in less than perfect conditions. It can handle average soil moderate drought once established, and a little bit of benign neglect. In fact, it often looks best when you let it relax into the surrounding planting instead of forcing it into a rigid little spot. It usually does well in full sun to part shade depending on your climate. In hotter parts of Texas, Georgia, or inland California, afternoon shade can help. In cooler areas like Zone 5 or 6, full sun is often just fine if the soil drains well. In the landscape, hardy geranium fills that middle layer beautifully. It softens the base of roses, shrubs, and upright perennials. It spills gently over edging. It makes the whole bed feel fuller and more connected. That is a big deal if your yard keeps looking like a bunch of separate plants instead of one cohesive design. A homeowner in Missouri planted hardy geranium between several larger perennials in a front bed that always looked too spaced out. By midsummer, that whole area had a much more complete, lush look, and she did not have to buy a single extra filler plant. Now the next plant brings a more cheerful, classic kind of flower power, and it is one of the easiest crowd pleasers on this list. Number 12. Shasta daisy. Shasta daisies are one of those plants that make a yard feel bright, clean, and instantly familiar in the best way. There is something about those crisp white petals and sunny yellow centers that just reads happy garden. But beyond that classic look, Shasta daisies are also one of the smartest April plantings you can make if you want a perennial that bulks up over time and gives you a lot of value without constant upkeep. Homeowners love them because they are easy to understand. They bloom reliably, they spread by enlarging clumps, and they fit almost any garden style from cottage to suburban formal to simple backyard borders. They also make fantastic cut flowers, which means one planting can beautify your yard and your kitchen table at the same time. What most people do not realize is that Shasta daisies gradually become more impressive each year if you divide them every few seasons. That means the plant is not just surviving, it is multiplying your investment. One small spring purchase can become several generous clumps you can move around the yard later. For practical details, Shasta daisies do best in full sun and well-drained soil. They are hardy in zones 5 through 9 and are especially dependable in places with sunny summers and decent airflow. Deadheading helps extend bloom, but even without perfect maintenance, they still give plenty of return. Visually, they create bold pockets of bright white that stand out beautifully against darker foliage or mixed perennial borders. They are excellent near fences, along side yard paths, or in front yard beds where you want the whole space to read clean and cheerful from the street. A family in Ohio planted a few Shasta daisies along the front walk because that area always looked flat after spring bulbs finished. By July, it looked brighter, fuller, and far more welcoming, and they had not done much more than water them early on. And if you like long bloom and easy performance but want a softer, more flowing yellow effect, the next plant is a favorite for a reason. Number 11. Coreopsis moonbeam. Coreopsis moonbeam is the kind of plant that makes everything around it look better. It has airy, buttery yellow flowers floating above fine textured foliage, and the effect is soft, light, and incredibly easy on the eyes. It does not scream for attention the way some bright flowers do. Instead, it creates this graceful haze of color that makes the whole bed feel calm, bright, and finished. Homeowners love it because it blooms for a long time, handles heat well, and slowly expands through underground growth without turning into a maintenance headache. Once established, it is one of those plants you can count on to keep showing up and filling in year after year. What most people do not realize is that moonbeam is especially useful in hot, dry sections of the yard where fussier plants struggle. That makes it a great solution for mailbox, beds, driveway edges, or sunny side yards where irrigation is not perfect and the soil is just average. It generally thrives in full sun with decent drainage and is a strong option for zones 5 through 9. In the south, it appreciates not being overwatered. In heavier soils, mix in compost when planting so the roots can establish more easily in spring. In a landscape, it reads like a soft cloud of color. It blends beautifully with purple, salvia, blue, catmint, ornamental grasses, and almost anything else that leans cool-toned. So if your goal is a bed that looks layered and intentional instead of stiff, this one is incredibly useful. A homeowner in Central Texas added moonbeam to a dry front bed where petunias kept failing. By the second season, the bed looked fuller, lighter, and a lot less needy. Now, before we move on, here is the mistake most homeowners make with fast-spreading perennials. They plant them too late. They wait until summer, when the heat is already stressing everything out, and then wonder why the plants are not taking off. April is different. The soil is warming, moisture is usually better, and roots can get established before summer starts asking more from the plant than it can give. And that timing matters even more for the next group, because these plants do not just fill in. They bring structure, color, and serious pollinator power. Number 10. Salvia May Night. If your yard needs vertical interest and strong color without a lot of pampering, Salvia May Night is one of the best perennials you can plant in April. This plant sends up rich violet-blue flower spikes above aromatic dark foliage, and the color is strong enough to anchor an entire planting scheme. It gives a bed-shape contrast and that designed feeling that makes the whole space look more intentional. Homeowners love it because it is tough. Once established, it handles heat well, tolerates dry spells, and tends to be ignored by deer. It also attracts pollinators constantly, especially bees, which makes the yard feel more alive all season. What most people do not realize is that its biggest strength may be structure. A lot of garden beds fail visually because everything is rounded and low. Salvia breaks that up. Those upright spires make neighboring plants look better, especially softer mounding plants like catmint or hardy geranium. It wants full sun, sharp drainage, and room for air movement. It performs best in zones 4 through 8, though in warmer areas with good drainage it still does very well. Cut it back after the first bloom flush, and you often get another strong show later. In the yard, this is the plant that makes a mixed border look less random. It is excellent near front walks along sunny fences or in island beds where you need some height without going shrub-sized. A homeowner in Illinois planted a drift of May Night near pale yellow coreopsis, and the contrast alone made the front bed look like something out of a landscape magazine. But if you want another long-blooming workhorse that can carry the bed deeper into summer, the next one may be even more valuable. Number 9. Black-eyed Susan, Goldsturm. There are a lot of yellow flowers out there, but Goldsturm Black-eyed Susan has become a classic for one simple reason: it works. It gives you bold, golden blooms with dark centers right when many other perennials start to lose momentum. And when planted in groups, it creates those rich sweeps of midsummer color that make a yard feel alive without looking overcomplicated. Homeowners love it because it is dependable, easy to divide, and willing to naturalize. It spreads through enlarging clumps and often reseeds enough to help fill in spaces over time. That means every year the bed can look a little fuller without you spending more money. What most people do not realize is how useful Goldsturm is for extending the season. A lot of spring-heavy yards look fantastic in May and then start fading by late July. This is one of the plants that keeps the garden from falling flat. For practical details, it grows best in full sun and handles average to even somewhat poor soil surprisingly well. It works in zones 3 through 9, which makes it one of the more flexible plants on this list. Water it regularly, the first season. After that, it is much easier to live with. Visually, it gives you that meadow-like energy without the chaos. It looks great in larger drifts near ornamental grasses or mixed with blue and purple bloomers for strong color contrast. A homeowner in Indiana used gold sturm to fill a long side yard border that had always felt empty after June. By the second year, that strip had become one of the brightest parts of the whole property. Now, if you want a perennial that needs even less attention and still manages to spread and bloom like it means it, the next plant is one of the toughest on the list. Number 8. Yarrow. Yarrow is the plant you choose when you want beauty pollinators and almost ridiculous toughness in one package. It gives you flat-topped flower clusters in shades of yellow, white, pink, red, or peach, depending on the variety, and those blooms sit over attractive, feathery foliage that still looks good even when the plant is not flowering hard. In other words, it earns its keep. Homeowners love yarrow because it spreads, survives, and keeps going without asking for much. It is especially useful in hot, sunny spots where other perennials need too much water or too much coddling. Once established, you do not have to babysit it. What most people do not realize is that yarrow often performs better in leaner soil than in rich soil. Too much fertility can make it floppy. So if you have a bed where the soil is not amazing and you are tired of plants acting offended by that, yarrow may actually be your answer. It wants full sun, excellent drainage, and is happiest in zones 3 through 9. In humid climates, give it space so air can move through the foliage. In dry western regions or sunny southern exposures, it is a star. In the landscape, yarrow gives you a soft meadow-meat structure feel. It works beautifully in pollinator gardens, water-wise borders, and wide sunny beds, where you need color that holds its own without constant upkeep. A homeowner in Arizona used yarrow along a hot front yard strip where turf had become too expensive to maintain. Once established, the yarrow cut water use significantly and still gave the space color and movement. And if you are looking for something with broader color options and a more familiar flower shape, the next plant may be the most versatile perennial in the entire list. Number 7. Daylily. Daylilies have been around forever, and there is a reason they have never gone out of style. Actually, there are several reasons. They are adaptable, they spread steadily, they come in an enormous range of colors, and once established, they deliver a lot of visual impact without constant maintenance. Homeowners love daylilies because they solve multiple problems at once. Need a plant that can fill space? Daylily. Need something colorful along a driveway or fence? Daylily. Need a perennial that can take heat, survive average conditions, and still look good for years? Daylily again. What most people do not realize is how easy it is to build a longer bloom season just by mixing types. Some bloom earlier, some later, and some rebloom. So instead of thinking of daylilies as one plant, it helps to think of them as a whole system you can layer for months of color. For practical details, most daylilies do best in full sun, though they tolerate part shade, especially in hotter climates. They are generally reliable in zones 3 through 9. Give them regular water the first season so they can establish good roots, then ease off as they mature. In the yard, daylilies create thick, arching masses of foliage and repeated pops of bloom that make a bed feel substantial. They are especially strong in suburban front yards where you want curb appeal without a lot of maintenance drama. A homeowner in Tennessee planted several clumps along a backyard fence that had always looked harsh and empty. Within a couple of seasons, that whole line looked softer, fuller, and far more intentional. Now here's where people waste the most money. They keep buying small, seasonal color for areas that really need long-term structure. That is exactly where perennials like these win. They do more each year instead of asking you to start over each spring. And the next group gets even better because these are plants that combine long bloom fragrance and serious visual payoff. Number 6. Catmint Walker's Low. Catmint Walker's Low may be one of the smartest perennials you can plant if you want your yard to look soft, full, and polished without constant upkeep. It produces masses of lavender blue flowers over silvery green foliage, and it blooms for such a generous stretch that it often becomes one of the most useful plants in the whole landscape. It also has that slightly mounding, slightly relaxed habit that helps hard edges feel less harsh. Homeowners love it because it gives a lot and asks very little. It is drought-tolerant, once-established, pollinator-friendly, and usually left alone by deer. It also responds beautifully to a midsummer trim, often rewarding you with another round of blooms. What most people do not realize is how versatile it is in design. This is not just a filler plant. It is one of the best connector plants in a landscape. It helps tie together roses, salvia daisies, grasses, and shrubs so the bed feels cohesive instead of chopped into sections. It performs best in full sun and well-drained soil and is generally reliable in zones 4 through 8. In humid areas, keep it from getting overcrowded. In dry or average conditions, it is often outstanding. Visually, catmint creates that hazy ribbon of blue that makes borders feel lush and professionally layered. Along a front walk or around a patio, it gives softness and movement without looking messy. A homeowner in Colorado planted catmint along a stone path where the edges had always looked too stiff. By early summer, the whole area felt calmer, fuller, and more expensive. But if you want fragrance along with that kind of flower power, the next plant is one that brings another dimension entirely. Number 5. Garden phlox. Garden phlox is for homeowners who want the yard to feel generous. Big flower clusters, strong color, real presence. And in many cases, fragrance that you notice before you even get close. People love garden phlox because it gives that full, old-fashioned summer garden energy while still being practical enough for a suburban landscape. It fills vertical space blooms when the garden needs a boost and attracts pollinators all season. What most people do not realize is that phlox can be much more reliable than its reputation if you choose the right varieties and give it decent airflow. A lot of the disappointment around phlox comes from crowded plantings or poor variety choice, not the plant itself. For practical details, phlox likes full sun to light, shade-good soil, and steady moisture, especially in hotter climates. It generally does well in zones 4 through 8. In humid areas, choose mildew-resistant cultivars and avoid overhead watering. In the yard garden, phlox gives you that strong midsummer to late summer presence that keeps the landscape from sagging after spring. It looks fantastic in the middle or back of a border, especially with shorter spreaders in front. A homeowner in Virginia planted white and soft pink phlox behind lower blue catmint and ended up with one of those layered combinations that made the front bed look far more expensive than it really was. Now, if you want a plant that brings not just flowers but real wildlife activity into the yard, the next one may be the most exciting of the bunch. Number 4. Bee balm. Bee balm is one of those plants that changes the mood of a garden. Yes, the flowers are dramatic. Bright reds, pinks, purples, and whites with those shaggy tubular blooms that stand out immediately. But what really makes bee balm special is what happens around it. Hummingbirds show up, bees crowd in, butterflies work the bed. Suddenly the yard feels active, lively, and connected to the season. Homeowners love bee balm because it spreads quickly through underground rhizomes and fills a generous patch faster than many other flowering perennials. It is especially good if you want the garden to stop looking sparse and start feeling abundant. What most people do not realize is that bee balm can be one of the easiest ways to make a backyard feel intentional and wildlife-friendly at the same time. It is not just beautiful, it creates a whole experience. For practical details, bee balm grows in full sun to part shade and appreciates more moisture than some of the drought-tolerant plants on this list. It performs best in zones 4 through 9. Good air circulation helps reduce mildew issues, and dividing every few years keeps it vigorous. In the landscape, it gives you bold summer color and enough height to stand out without becoming bulky. It is especially effective in pollinator beds, informal borders, or backyard spaces where you actually spend time outside and want movement around you. A homeowner in Michigan planted bee balm near a patio seating area so they could enjoy more wildlife up close. By July, hummingbirds had become part of the morning routine. Most nurseries will not tell you this clearly enough. If you want a yard that looks lush fast, you need a mix of plants that do different jobs. Some fill low, some mound, some spike upward. Some bring scent. Some bring wildlife. That layering is what creates richness. And that brings us to the top 3. These are the plants that give you some of the biggest visual payoff, some of the easiest spread, and the strongest finished landscape effect once they settle in. Number 3. Hosta. If you have shade part shade or those frustrating side yard spaces where flowering plants never seem happy, hosta may be one of the most valuable perennials you can plant in April. A lot of people think of hostas as simple foliage plants, but that seriously undersells them. Hostas are landscape structure. They spread by enlarging clumps, they create broad, lush foliage masses, and they make shady areas look planted on purpose instead of abandoned. Homeowners love hostas because they solve a very specific problem. How do you make shade look rich without turning it into a maintenance project? Hostas answer that beautifully. They fill out, they divide easily over time, and they create that full layered look that makes even a difficult side bed feel intentional. What most people do not realize is that foliage is often what makes a yard look expensive. Flowers are wonderful, but lush foliage is what makes a space feel established. That is exactly where hostas shine. For practical details, hostas do best in part shade to shade and generally thrive in zones 3 through 9 depending on variety. They prefer decent soil and regular moisture while establishing, but once settled in, they are surprisingly resilient. In hotter southern areas, keep them out of harsh afternoon sun. If deer are a major issue where you live, that is something to consider because deer do enjoy them. In the yard, hostas create bold mounds that soften foundations, brighten shaded walkways, and make tree-adjacent beds look deliberate instead of difficult. They are especially useful in suburban landscapes where one side of the house gets ignored because nothing looks good there. A homeowner in New Jersey had a narrow shaded bed between the house and fence that always looked gloomy and unfinished. A row of hostas transformed it from a dead zone into one of the cleanest looking parts of the property. Now, if hosta owns the shade category, the next plant dominates sunny ground cover situations where you want a lot of spread and a lot of color with very little hassle. Number 2. Creeping Jenny. Creeping Jenny is one of the fastest ways to make a bed look full-flowing and expensive without spending a fortune. This is a low-growing, fast-spreading perennial with bright chartreuse foliage that practically glows, especially in spring and early summer. It trails, it softens edges, it fills gaps, and it gives you a strong color contrast that makes neighboring plants stand out more. Homeowners love it because it covers ground quickly and creates that lush spilling effect people usually associate with professionally installed landscapes. It is also excellent in containers, raised beds, and along stone edges where you want something to cascade naturally. What most people do not realize is how powerful foliage color can be in making a garden feel brighter. Creeping Jenny does not need giant blooms to be useful. Its value is in the way it lights up the planting and ties everything together visually. For practical details, it grows in full sun to part shade and performs best in zones 4 through 9. In cooler climates, more sun gives you brighter color. In hotter areas, part shade may help prevent scorching. Keep the soil evenly moist during establishment, especially in sunnier sites. In the landscape, it creates that draping, finished look around, stepping stones at the front of borders, or spilling out of containers near an entry. That kind of softness does a lot for curb appeal. A homeowner in Oregon added Creeping Jenny along the edge of a mixed front bed where the mulch line always looked harsh. Within one season, the bed looked softer, fuller, and much more polished from the street. And now we are at number 1, the plant that may give you the biggest combination of spread, color, pollinator activity, and pure summer presence on this entire list. Number 1. Obedient plant. Obedient plant is not talked about nearly enough for what it can do in a landscape. If you want a perennial that spreads with confidence, fills vertical space, and gives you striking flower spikes in late summer when other plants are beginning to slow down, this one is hard to beat. It produces upright stems packed with tubular blooms in shades of pink, white, or lavender, and once it gets established, it builds presence in a way that makes a yard look much fuller than it did the year before. Homeowners love Obedient plant because it spreads readily through underground runners and can fill larger spaces faster than many more timid perennials. That makes it especially useful in back borders, wider island beds, and those open spaces where you need something to hold its own. What most people do not realize is that Obedient plant is one of the easiest ways to get that lush layered late summer abundance look without replanting annuals every year. It also attracts pollinators beautifully, which adds even more life to the garden. For practical details, it grows best in full sun to part shade and typically performs well in zones 3 through 9. It likes average to moist soil and is especially happy where it is not forced to compete with extremely aggressive shrubs. If you want it to stay tidier, divide it every few years. If you want it to fill in more generously, give it room and let it work. In the landscape, Obedient Plant brings height, rhythm, and color exactly when many beds need a second wind. It is particularly strong in backyard borders, cottage-style plantings, or larger suburban beds where smaller perennials can get visually lost. A homeowner in Kentucky planted Obedient Plant behind lower-growing summer bloomers in a sunny backyard bed that always looked good in June and tired by August. By the second season, that bed had a whole new level of fullness and late summer energy, and it no longer looked like the garden had peaked too early. And that is really the whole point of planting the right, fast-spreading perennials in April. You are not just planting flowers. You are building momentum. You are setting up the yard to do more for you with less effort later. Because once these plants establish, most of them start rewarding you in ways annuals never can. They fill gaps, they divide, they spread, they return, they save you money over time. And they make the landscape feel more settled, more finished, and much more intentional without constant upkeep. So if your goal this year is a yard that looks fuller by summer and better again next year, start in April. That is the sweet spot. The soil is warming, the roots can settle in, the heat has not started punishing new plantings yet, and that head start matters. So here is what I want you to do next. Pick one sunny spot, one problem bed, or one area of the yard that always feels unfinished. Then choose 2 or 3 of these perennials that solve that specific problem. Do not overcomplicate it. Just build one smart section at a time and let those plants start doing what they were designed to do. If this helps, subscribe and stick around, because next I'm going to show you some of the best perennials for brutal summer heat and the ones that thrive in shade without turning into a maintenance headache. And tell me in the comments what state you garden in, because if enough of you want it, I'll do a region-specific version of this list for the South, the Midwest, the Northeast, and the West. Plant smart, give those roots a strong April start, and your summer yard will thank you for it.